I'm a huge sucker for a good villain. I'm one of the people who believe that the hero's journey is nothing if the villain of his story is trash. The better the villain, the better the hero. The better the hero, the better the story. Think about it. Batman without the Joker, boring. Some of the best Batman stories involve the Joker. Superman without Lex Luthor or Darkseid, boring. Some of the best Superman movies or Superman stories involve Lex Luthor or Darkseid. The Flash, nothing without the Reverse Flash. Captain America, nothing without Red Skull. There are just so many heroes who are defined by how great their villains are. And I think Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings really hit the mark by making the Mandarin a sympathetic villain. And I didn't think he was going to be a sympathetic villain. Like going into this, I really didn't think that the Mandarin was going to be somebody that I felt sorry for, that I was rooting for in some way, shape, or form. As you see the beginning of the movie. The beginning of the movie sets the tone for the type of villain that you think you're going to see. Where he wants power and he wants to rule the world and he wants basically everything under the sun. But as you progress through the movie, you start to realize that the dude didn't even really want any of that. When he first meets his wife, Ying Li, the fight that they have is fucking beautiful. All the fights in Shang-Chi are beautiful. Like, they're all fantastic. And I love each and every one of them. But there are two fights, in my opinion, that really hit me in the chest. The very first one is between Xu Wenwu and Ying Li, where he meets her for the very first time. And it's just like this poetry and this flow, and it's gorgeous to look at. And that's the first time that you realize, because before that, the look on his face was always like this apathetic look, where he was more or less just bored with everything. He had money, he had power, he had fame, but he felt empty. So he believed that going to Talo and gaining Talo's magic would be able to fill that emptiness inside of his chest. And then he goes to the gates of Talo and he meets Ying Li and he realizes that I didn't want any of this shit. Like, I didn't want money, I didn't want power. I just want this I just want this lady's love. That is all I want. I want this one random lady in the middle of this murderous man-eating forest's love. That is all. And he gets that. And I'm like, fuck yeah. And then you see him looking at like the newborn Shang-Chi and he's like super fucking happy and he has his kids and they're doing DDR inside the house. And you're like, yo, how does this guy end up being like, you start off with a point where you're like, this dude's the villain. And then you go through this transformation and you're like, how did this guy get back to being a villain? And then you realize that his wife's gone and you're like, oh no. But I think the movie did a really good job of not telling you how she died too soon. Because it helps with the impact later on. And what I mean is that if the movie had, like, in the beginning just decided that we're going to tell you flat out that his wife gets murdered by gangsters, it wouldn't have had the same impact going forward because that thought's already in your head. So to you, when you realize that Ying Li has died, you're like, oh, she probably died to like a disease or something along those lines. But then when you discover that she was murdered, you're like, oh shit. But it's the subtle rage, like that smoldering rage, because when he gets back and he sees that she's dead, he drops like the bag of groceries in the water and then he runs up. And Shang-Chi goes into the room later on to talk to him and he's like sitting at the desk. And I don't know why, but like I from like the demeanor, from like how he was sitting in the chair, I was like, he's fucking pissed off. Hold on, what? I gotta look up his name because I don't want to butcher it. Tony Leung. Like, I remember you from Hard Boiled, and it's been a really long time since I'd watched a lot of your movies, but this dude is an amazing fucking actor. Across the board, crushes it. And I mean, the very next scene, he has the rings back on his hands, and he has his son with him, and they walk into like the pachinko parlor, and they stop in the pachinko parlor, and he looks down at his son, and Shang-Chi looks across, and he's like, yeah, Dad, that's him. And he just, not even, rings are on. He can blast them and kill them all. Create a whip, cut them in half. None of that. It's all about statement. It's all about rage. All of that internalized rage comes out in an instant. Boom! Blasts the table. Sends the one guy across the room. Blocks the bullets. Blasts the guy through the window. Whips the guy in half. Picks up the other guy, tosses him across the room, walks up and over. And this is a point where I kind of felt as though the character had fully changed and reverted back into a villain. Because he had the speech before, which was, your mother thought that I could be a good person, but I can't be a good person because of all the things that I've done. And he instantly kills that dude in front of his son. And that's when I feel as though the father, Xu Wenwu, died, and he had reverted back to the Mandarin, or my favorite title for him, the most dangerous man on earth. And that's when I feel as though his kid's trajectories just completely changed and went in a different direction, where he started just vigorously training his son, not in his mother's way, but in his more close-fisted, 100% fighting, like, raw, I'm here to kill you type of way. So, Shang-Chi goes off on his own. He spends 10 years away, but the rage for Xu Wenwu doesn't die. Like, losing his son, having his son leave, doesn't temper his rage, doesn't make him realize he was wrong. Having his daughter leave doesn't temper her rage, doesn't temper his rage again, doesn't make him realize that he's wrong. Then he starts hearing the voices from the Dweller in Darkness. And that's when you realize, and that's when more or less in the movie theater I realized something, which was his character and Dracula from the Castlevania series are really on that same type of trajectory, where there was a point where a quote Dracula said in Castlevania, not only from him hearing the voice of his wife, but later on when he's fighting Shang-Chi. There's a quote that Dracula says, which is, no, I'm sorry, it's not Dracula, it's from Alucard, which is that this is history's longest suicide note, where he basically died the day that my mother died. And I felt that way for Xu Wenwu, where when he walked in and he saw that his wife was gone, there wasn't a Mandarin anymore. Like, the man that he was before had essentially died. And he more or less reverted back to that person, and his body went on autopilot. And he was more or less being manipulated by the Dweller in Darkness. And he goes off and just lays waste to Talo. Goes all the way across and just starts beating in that door. Fights his son. And only when, no matter what Shang-Chi was saying, he didn't want to hear it. It was only when the Dweller came out and he realized that it was a lie, that he didn't have any fight in him anymore, that he didn't have the rage anymore. Like, he realized his wife was actually gone. There was nothing that he could do to bring her back. That this entire journey was for nothing. And when the Dweller snatched him up, he looked down and he looked at his son and he realized, like, how fucking wrong he was. And in his atonement for what he did, he gave his son the rings. And then he chose to die. And that is beautiful fucking writing. Like, that is great. That is great writing That is great acting. That absolutely fantastic. The only other time I can honestly say I've seen good writing for a villain was Killmonger in Black Panther. But holy shit. If this is the level of villains where we're getting complex villains now, if this is the level of villains that we're going to be getting going forward, well, I'm here for it. 100%. Because one of the reasons why I didn't like Black Widow was that Black Widow didn't have a good villain. It also didn't have good twists, but it didn't have a good villain. And not a memorable villain. Because your hero is only as good as the villain. I sound like Professor Zoom. I sound like Eobard Thawne when I say that. But it's the honest truth. Like, you remember your heroes, but for damn sure, you're gonna remember the villains that your hero takes on. And Xu Wenwu the Mandarin, holy fuck, if he is not one of the best villains that Marvel has put on screen.